gatekeepers now. Get back, gotta get on the right track, on the right track. Get back, gotta get on the right track, on the right track. Yeah, I know I should hold on for something good, something better than anything I thought I could. Get back, gotta get back.
Welcome everyone to A Sound of Hope. Today we have one of my good friends, Lacey Johnson. She is a mental health and relationships journalist, a book author, a speaker, and I am so excited to have her because we have these conversations all the time. And so now you guys get to be a part of this, and it's amazing because what she has to say and what she can offer everyone today is absolutely life-changing. So Lacey, thank you so much for being here today.
When you were introducing me, I couldn't help but think that you were such a big part of my turning point. Do you remember? About 11 years ago?
Yeah.
Yeah, you were a huge part of that turning point. You played such an important role. So it's such a delight that I'm in such a different place, and now I get to share with your audience, and you were a part of that. So we'll get to that. Well, but that's just really, I hadn't even thought about it that way, and then it hit me, and I'm like, wow, this is really cool. Wow, which is just an example of God's transformation process if you'll just accept it. So anyway.
That's right, girl. Thank you for saying that. Like, I feel like I'm gonna cry. Just because it's real stuff that we've talked about. Like, I really feel like our relationship has been really deep and wide, and we've been there for each other through hard times. And the way we met was just so cool. We actually were doing makeup together, and God had us just as like sisters to come together and encourage each other. And I feel the same for you. You definitely have inspired me. You've given me like prophetic words about my husband and about, just future things that were happening. So you've been such a light and a joy to me. So. Well, this is just so fun. This is so fun.
And when we met, actually, I was not in a good place, but I was sort of like on a precipice of a new morning, it felt like, but I wasn't there. I felt like there was something whistling around the corner, but I couldn't see it. And I had just come back from a mission trip from Belize, my first mission trip there, which was such a transformative experience. And I think I told you, and you were like, oh, you just got back from a mission trip? Can we be friends? I'm like, yes, let's be friends.
I know. Okay, so tell us about your story. Like, you're this like super boss, awesome journalist right now.
You say so.
Working with like top, like from neuroscientists to psychologists to spiritual thought leaders, entrepreneurs. Yeah. And you get to hear like the top opinions of what's going on in the world in our modern day right now. And I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about that. Well, first, tell us about your journey and how you got to where you are today.
So I think that we're here on this earth to teach what we're here to learn. I think that God puts us here. I think that our greatest gifts are often hidden in our deepest, darkest dysfunctions. I don't think that's an accident at all. And I think that we're meant to, where our pain is where we're driven to search, and that's where our treasures lie oftentimes. I've experienced that in my life, but I've seen it so many times. So my life started out, I say that because it was such an organic process to get to focus in the realm of mental health and empowerment and relationships. And I got there honestly because I fumbled so much along the way. But I was born into a very closely knit Southern American family, of believers and tremendous support, close, loving. And when I was 6 years old, 6.5, my family had a furniture store business, and there was a gas leak. One of the gas pipes started leaking, and it exploded. And my mom, my 2 aunts, and my grandmother passed away. Wow. And it was a really so my dad lost his mom, his wife, his little sister, and his sister-in-law, and like basically it felt like half of my family was wiped out, and in a moment. You know, it made national news at the time, so we had reporters calling our homes. We were just literally dropped into the arms of unimaginable despair. We were sucker punched, you know, it's what we felt like. And, you know, one thing that I'm really passionate about is there was that traumatic event that happened, but there were a lot of, that was the macro trauma. But then there were a lot of micro traumas that happened in the aftermath. You know, the first time that I realized my mother wasn't going to be there to get me dressed for school. The first time I had to go to Mother's Day program at school and I didn't have anyone in the chair next to me. You know, things like that. So from a very young, vulnerable age, I was entrenched in grief, trauma, and the reality that there kind of is no safety in this life, is what it felt like. You know what I mean? I also no longer had any caregiver in my life, from my dad to my grandmother, who wasn't in a state of immense grief, because my entire maternal side was grieving my mom, and then my father's side was grieving multiple people, and then they had a spotlight over them, and they lost their business, and it was just so much ruin. But I will say that one of the greatest gifts in that experience is that I learned from a young age that it's not the event that happens to you in this life that defines who you are. It's not the things that happen to you. It's not the misfortune that comes your way, the adversities that you're asked to walk through. Those things don't define you. They don't make your life. They don't even make your outcome. It's your response to those events. So it's what happens, the way you respond to it creates this like movie that you will find yourself living in. I was very fortunate that I had a family who were very much believers, and I had tremendous support in that. However, what I didn't have, which would go on to really harm me, I didn't have at the time anyone who said, let's go to therapy, or let's go talk to someone, or let's unpack this trauma, and let's manage, you know, let's manage this, the response to this, and let's unpack this, and let's explore this. It was sort of just like, let's go to church and pray about it. And, you know, that does not work. That is, and so I went through my life having a lot of, I guess I'd describe it as I felt like, my dad remarried to a wonderful woman. They had, they gave me brothers, but it wasn't, and I was very fortunate in that, but it wasn't like, we were gonna like ride off into the sunset together. I still had a lot of unprocessed grief and trauma that I had carried with me. I was still like this lost, confused child inside. And on the surface, things looked like things had gotten better. My dad had married this wonderful woman, and they produced children, and we were all just gonna ride off into the sunset together. But the truth is that trauma and pain, if left unattended, it will bully and deceive you, and it will shove you into the arms of total lies about who you are and your worth. And so I throughout my life, in my teen years, my young adult years, I made a lot of what I write about and call trauma-driven decisions. It was literally being pulled along by my trauma and unattended abandonment issues, and unprocessed grief, and unmanaged pain. And so it wasn't until I'd had a string of extremely emotionally abusive, volatile relationships. I didn't know why I was choosing men like that. At the time, I didn't know why. I later realized that I had abandonment issues from losing my mother suddenly, and I was subconsciously choosing people that, even though they made me miserable and they were very jealous and possessive, I knew that they would never leave me. I didn't know I was doing that, but that was a part of my trauma that was unprocessed. And so it created a series of additional traumas that will happen if you do not tend to your trauma. you will continue to create them. You will live a trauma-driven life, and you will create more and more and more pain for yourself. When I was I'd reached just an unbelievable low. I was finishing my journalism degree at Belmont. I knew that I wanted to be a writer. I knew that I had talent as a storyteller. I knew that I had a desire to spark conversations, and I knew that I loved people, and I was fascinated by human beings, and I loved talking to people and exploring their minds and their journeys. I wanted to illuminate the human experience in vivid ways, but I didn't know exactly how that would play out. And when I was finishing up my degree, I stumbled upon this lecture by a cell biologist who had done a lot of research on the subconscious mind and sort of in trauma. And it was like a trap door opened up for me. And I was stunned. I was in awe. I was in a state of just unbelievable awe. And I was like, I was in so much despair, but it was like a lighthouse. That information was like a lighthouse.
Wow.
And it unlocked my spirit. It unlocked so many things in me, and I just felt like I allowed myself to be led by the fragrance of like the curiosity about that. I was so intrigued by it, and I thought, what if this information, like what if, like, how I'm going to test it out on myself. Yeah. I mean, I've been so low, and I've made so many, self-destructive decisions. My heart can't take any more pain. I can't go on like this, but I'm here, so I might as well, try to just to pursue and study this information. And so I began to become my own experiment. I began to study my own pain, study my own trauma, study my own belief kingdom. And in that process, one day I was like, this is what I'm going to do. This is the type of journalism I'm going to pursue. And we could talk about this all day, but it was within a year, and you played a huge role in this as well. A whole new world opened up for me, and I was feeding my mind and my spirit with life-giving things, life-giving information. Yeah. I allowed myself to step into the element of choice. I no longer allowed myself to stay in the belly of pain and despair, and I allowed myself to respond to my grief, my trauma, and my pain in a different way. And within a year's time, I had a radically different life. And I had the same memories, the same brain, the same biological blueprint, the same parents, the same circumstances, the same zip code, but I had an entirely different life.
So tell me, what was a few of those turning points? Like you mentioned the cell biologist. Like
that was the lecture.
Because I know when people are probably listening to you right now saying, "Oh my gosh, like I totally resonate with her." But how did she turn? How did she get out? I know you're saying you have a choice. What was it? I know there was the unlocking of listening to him. Yeah. But sometimes people can know to do better, but it's what they believe about themselves. Right?
Sure,
so how
absolutely.
did you turn that?
I remember there was one morning, I'm telling you, I was so depressed that putting my feet on the carpet felt like slinging cement. I mean, I was so in a chokehold of pain and shame. I had been in this relationship for years. I was hiding it from friends and family most of the time. I was afraid to leave. I didn't know why, but I was afraid to leave because I had severe abandonment issues from childhood that had never been addressed. And so my subconscious mind was screaming, I have to hang on to someone who will never leave me. I have to hang on to someone. I didn't know that that's what I was doing. I didn't understand it. I just felt like a victim. And I remember I was so low one day, and I just said, I cried out to God. I'd been crying out to God, though. Yeah. And I was like, I have nowhere to go but up. I can't be here anymore. I mean, I will say it's one of the closest times I'd ever had to suicidal thoughts. So I definitely have danced with those thoughts, and I want to be very transparent about that because I don't want, the last thing I would want to do is ever contribute to anyone who has had suicidal thoughts, who may be having them now. I want to get rid of that shame. I want to get rid of that shame. Yeah. There's no shame. Yeah. That we have no need for shame at all. And as far as that goes, But I definitely danced with those thoughts because I felt like I couldn't house any more pain. And I couldn't get it right. I couldn't get it right. I was like doggy paddling in a swamp of unprocessed trauma, and I was just going like this, and I just felt like I couldn't get it right. And I just was like, I can't do this anymore. And I had a thought. I said, I either have to go, like I have to off myself, or I have to start challenging everything that I think I know for sure. I have to start doing the opposite of what I'm doing because this is not working. So what I started doing was, instead of just listening to music on the way to class, I would start listening to, lectures on YouTube about re-scripting trauma, reconceptualizing trauma, about how our traumas, traumatic memories imprint on our subconscious mind, how it affects the amygdala, the fear center of the brain, how it can affect and shape who you are when you're 60 years old. Once I realized that, I remember at the time, this cell biologist, Bruce Lipton, said that, our subconscious mind is like an old school tape recorder. And there's just those thoughts on a loop. You're unworthy, you're abandoned, you're left behind. I felt that I was leftovers from a life that had gone badly wrong. Why didn't I die in that fire? What was the point of me staying? I'm doing nothing but causing problems for my dad. My brothers are so perfect. My dad has this cute new little family now, and I'm leftovers from a life that went badly wrong. Why am I here? I don't need to be here. I can't get it right. I'm making all these decisions. I'm an embarrassment to my family. I'm a screw up. I had these thoughts on a loop. My mom left me. You know what I mean? I wasn't worthy of her sticking around. Once I realized that those were a response to trauma, it was on a loop in my subconscious mind. I had the power to rewrite the information on that.
That's so good.
I was like, oh, like I when that happened, I so vividly remember that moment. It was just so much awe, and so I thought, that's what I'm going to do. And I began to, instead of following my despair every day, I followed my sense of curiosity and wonderment. And I began to develop this reverence for my own brain and my life.
That's so good.
And I began to think, this is a fascinating experience to even be here on this planet. I think of all the odds you beat, even being conceived. It's unimaginable, okay? And trust me, I know, because I went through 4 years of infertility and I studied the science of conception just out of desperation. But I began to just have reverence for my own ability to access supernatural power that we all have access to, and have reverence for my own breath. And I began to turn to see it differently. Instead of thinking I'm left, I thought, I'm still here. I didn't die in that fire.
Come on.
I'm like,
wow.
Oh my gosh. I began to pay attention to the fact that, after everything that my dad had gone through, he didn't just lie down and collapse into a state of perpetual doom. He got up and he went to law school and he found love again. And I just began to pay attention, and so every day I was feeding my mind with podcasts and empowering music. I got very selective about the music that I listened to. Very selective about just everything that I was feeding my mind. And at the time I began to realize that at every moment of every day, God gives us a garden of alternatives. What are you going to choose? Where are you going to cast sunlight? How are you going to nourish the soil? What are you going to reach for? How are you going to satiate and flavor your life?
Come on,
you
that's
have
so
a
good.
choice.
Yeah.
And I believe one of the most disempowering things that we can ever say to someone is just give it to God. Don't give it to God, ? Period. Give it to God and access.
Like that. Mm-hmm.
Access the brain that God gave you. You know, the tools that we have, this abundance of tools that we have on the element of choice that you have at every moment of every day. That is a freaking powerful thing, and it's a beautiful thing, and it's a loving thing. It is such love to be given options. We have so many. And so I began to really get an understanding that it wasn't the event that defined me and that would define my future. Yes, I had experienced unimaginable traumatic events in my life, but if I could respond in a different way, my outcome would be different. And that's exactly what happened.
That's so good. So you hit on something about the response that you feel like maybe Christians or believers give to trauma or to people feeling anxiety or depression. And they say things that are like, well, just give it to God, or you just need to pray harder. What do you feel is the right response? Like what did you need from someone that is a Christian and they know that you were going through these things? Like, what would you need them to do for you?
I needed them to not say things like, well, you know, God is maybe testing you, or it's just God's will, or, you know, this is just part of God's plan, or you need to just hit your knees. All of those things have merit and are biblical, okay? So I'm not discounting those things at all. But that is only a part of the equation. That is only a part of the equation. I wish that I had people who encouraged me without the shame, without any condemnation, to encourage my stepping into my own power of choice that God gave me. I now see that the best way that I can honor my Creator, that I can honor my mother's memory, is to choose joy and love and beauty. Every smile on my lips is a gift back to my Creator. You know, we'll talk about this too, but about a year and a half ago, I had like my worst fear in the world almost came true. And I know you know this story. It took me 4 years to have, you know, get pregnant with my little girl, which was a whole other set of traumas because that's a very multidimensional topic, and I'm happy to talk about any of it. I don't know how much time we have. But I'd craved that bond of that mother's love since I was 6.5 years old. And I felt like I felt like God had abandoned me during that time because I'm like, I craved, I didn't know why God didn't seem to agree that I deserved to be a mother. If my mother was taken from me, why didn't I have that? It was absolutely I could talk about that all day long.
Yeah.
We'll switch back to that. I did get pregnant with my beautiful, magical daughter who I just love every cell in her body. I'm so grateful for her. And when she was 18 months old, it was in the fall of 2020, after, you know, COVID had cast its net over us all and like shoved us into strangeness and isolation. I was pushing her through a mall parking lot, and I was full body run over by a speeding, unlicensed 17-year-old driver. Now, I will say that I had a supernatural experience. I had a supernatural, mystical experience that is, I can't even chase the words to accurately describe what it was. It was definitely something between me and God, and I'll never be able to really give it justice. I know that. But I was pushing her in her stroller, and all of a sudden I felt this monstrous weight shove me to the pavement and roll over my shoulder, arm, and hand. And it ran over my hair. I actually had to rip my hair out to get out from underneath it. But it was going toward my skull. And in my head, I screamed. I didn't scream out loud, but in my head, I went, oh my God, I'm about to die, oh my God. And in the most peaceful authority, it was not a shout back. It was total peaceful authority. It said, no, you're not today. And boom, the tire slammed to a stop. I slithered out from underneath a car to get my baby, who was screaming. I'd had her tightly strapped in, and by some miracle, I had tossed her to safety. I don't even remember doing that, but the mall cameras show that I tossed her to safety in the impact. And I don't remember doing it at all. she was fine, but I share this experience because, number one, obviously this voice, this beautiful love that I was told in that moment, I felt like I was in a supernatural cocoon. I truly do. And I will carry that with me for the rest of my life because it was such a beautiful moment. And as strange as it is, I would go through that trauma all over again to have had that beautiful moment because through every traumatic event that we're given in life, there are a bevy of gifts through and on the other side of it. That's just the way that's the way that this process is. But I share this because in the aftermath, when I took to social media and I shared what happened, I had so many people say, "Oh my gosh, Lacey, you have gone through so much trauma in your life. I do believe this is going to be another round of PTSD for you." And I believe a lot of these people that said these things really had good intentions. Truly, I do. Oh, it's going to be a long time before you can step foot in a parking lot again. It's going to be a long time before you can be out in a car. You're probably not going to want to take your baby anywhere. Oh my gosh, you're going to have PTSD from this. And all of these people were coming at me with all of these ideas about how I was going to respond to my trauma. And after everything that I'd been through in my life and all the work that I've done in the realm of mental health and interviewing just these brilliant experts, studying trauma, studying the human resilience process, the human transformation process, I decided that wasn't going to be my story. And so a couple of days after I actually decided to have my husband, with my shoulder and arm and everything bandaged up, I had him take me back to the scene and I drove my car home. And I didn't do it to prove anything to myself or to anyone else. I did it because I knew that I still had a life to live. I didn't die underneath that car.
Come on.
God kept me here.
That's so good.
I was supposed to be here. So the point of this is, no matter what you've been through, there are things in your life that every person listening, there are things that have happened to you that are wrong. They're not fair. They're ways you were violated or bullied, betrayed, abandoned, abused, mistreated, deceived. There is hurt. We live in a fallen world, and there are things that have happened to you you'll never have deserved them. They will never be okay. But the way you respond to them will always be your responsibility, and you can respond. You have the choice to respond and live in your pity for yourself, live in your despair, live in a state of withdrawal, live in a state of hiding yourself from the world, live in a state of sorrow. But that's not going to serve your life. I knew that I still had a life to live. I was still on this earth. It was a gift that I didn't die underneath that car, and I was going to honor and have reverence for that gift. And I was a mother, and I was a wife, and I was a friend, and I have work to do, and the world wants my presence. So I have to walk through. I have to go into parking lots. I have to be able to go in a car because I have a life to live and I'm here.
That's so good. Honestly, I just want to say thank you so much for the gift that you are, because that is so life-giving, and that's not the narrative that the world feeds us, and that is so empowering. And I'm just my questions are just bubbling inside, and all the questions I want to ask you of well, how can I live this life that you're living? You've done it. You've done the hard work. You've gone through this trauma. You've gone through this grief and this pain, and yet you're resilient and you're here. And how are you doing it? And there's you've actually laid it out for us. You wrote a book, and it's called Radical Renovation.
Radical Life Renovation.
Radical Life, thank you. And let me grab it really quick. It's right here. And it is phenomenal. It is a guided program to heal the past, reclaim your power, and build a future you love.
Yes.
This is phenomenal.
Thank
So
you.
as I'm thinking about all of the ways that you've been able to empower yourself and equip yourself, could you share that with everybody else? Specifically, I love when in here you talk about exiling the lies and then reclaiming your new truth. And so you actually have people write it down, your lies and then your truth, to really process, I feel the trauma.
Yes.
This is it. Because what I'm hearing from you is that a lot of your freedom from trauma and grief has been processing it.
And it's radical transparency. There is no freedom in this life without honesty and responsibility. If you want to be free, you need to take ownership of your life. You literally hold the deed to your own life story. When you came onto this earth, that God gave you the deed to your own life story.
So good.
And you're empowered with everything that you need if you will access that.
Yeah.
So there's a 4-step process in that. And you would ask me earlier what inspired it. I actually wrote it in the midst of COVID because at the beginning of COVID, I was so busy with being assigned so many stories. There was such an urgent need for information. And I am a journalist. So there was a lot of like how to talk to your kids about the coronavirus, what to do if you're lonely, how to socialize during COVID and isolation, how it's affecting our personalities. I did all kinds of stories in the different facets of how the pandemic was affecting our social lives and our relationships and our mental health and all of that, and our families. And I just felt there was such a crisis. I could feel it. And I was talking to all these experts who were like, I've never had such an urgent need for people. You know, it was just people were freaking out. And there was nowhere to run. There was no happy hour to rush off to and block your trauma for a night. There was no, you couldn't meet up have coffee with a friend as easily, and some people were forced to go across the coast, and people were grieving. There were macro griefs and micro griefs. And I felt like in my life, my personal experience and my expertise and all of the amazing minds that I've worked with and all the studies that I've read on honing the power of your resilience in the space between total devastation and total transformation. I'm so in love with that space. I feel like that is like my playground of my work. I just love it. I created this program, but I'll tell you what, there's four phases. There's purge, reimagine, let the light and wonder in, and build a beautiful future. It's very scientific, but I deliver it with stories that are very digestible. From my life, from observations, from experts that I've interviewed. I've created rituals and exercises as well to unlock various rooms within people and things that they need to discover. The purge part sucks. It's like the part that nobody wants to do, and a lot of times I find that people get stuck there, and here's why. If you think about renovating your house, what's the first step? You have to decide what needs to go before you can build what you want, before you can build your haven, right? You have to, what wall needs to go? Or this closet is cluttered with junk that I've been pretending not to know. What happens is when people get in the purge phase, which I guide them through, exploring the lies, first you have to identify what the monsters are in your mental closet, right? You have to get them out because they're going to find you anyway, and they always do. Now you can keep shoving them away, but just when you go to try to build the life you want, they kind of slither from the shadows and like hiss at you. So you have to stare them in their eyeballs, and that can be really uncomfortable. In order to process your pain and your regret and your shame and your disappointment and your trauma and your all of the things, you have to stare it in its eyeballs. And you have to know it is not more powerful than you. It is not more powerful than you. So a lot of people get stuck there because what happens is, and they get into like a deeper funk initially because they're pulling everything out of their closets, their mental closets, and then they're like, and now I feel worse because I'm staring at everything. And then they're just surrounded by all the junk. Right. You have to keep going. Yeah. The second phase of the program is reimagine. And that's where it's like, sort of like, putting our picket fence mentalities to rest. The things that we thought we were, kind of exploring all these things that we felt we should do, that we believed that we wanted, but it's really a should disguised as a want, putting all of these ideals and the shames and regrets to rest and reimagining like, okay, maybe I don't have what I thought I wanted to by now. Maybe I don't have the net worth I thought I wanted to have. Maybe I don't have the partner or the family. But what can I reimagine for myself going forward? And so that's the beginning. And then there's let the light and wonder in, where I do create some bedtime stories and some tools and rituals and some prompts to access your sense of childlike wonder again, of calling upon that which is innately within you. And then the fourth step is to strategically create a strategy, a blueprint for how your life's going to be, no matter what comes, no matter what storms over your plans, no matter what comes your way. Who are you going to be in this life, in this pain, in this day, in these circumstances, whatever comes? Who are you going to be? Because you have total dominion over whatever that is.
Wow.
God gave it to you,
Wow.
and no one can take it away from you ever. And so I feel like in my work, I will say one last thing that I want to add to this is, in our digital age, and I've written a lot of social media's impact on our mental health, and there is an absolute mental health crisis in adolescents right now.
Yeah, talk about that.
I will, but I will say one thing that I've noticed is because we're in the information age, and so everyone has a microphone, there's a lot of misinformation and a lot of airing out our pain and hyper-focusing on it. And that's kind of like what I was talking about when you get stuck in the purge phase, is airing everything out and then like just sitting in it. I feel like what's wrong in my observation and my experience and my expertise, what's wrong with a lot of programs and things out there is that they focus too long on what's wrong about you. I like to address what's wrong, but I want to focus on what's right about you.
Yeah.
I want to put a huge magnifying mirror over the unimaginable mega event that is your life.
Yeah.
All the odds that you beat to even be here.
Yeah.
I don't know, however old you are, think of all the dangers you've dodged throughout your life.
Yeah.
It is an absolute miracle to even make it to 10 years old.
It's so
you know?
true.
I mean,
Yes.
there's so much that could take you out, so much that, and you are mightier than everything that could have
Yeah.
ever taken you out. And so I really like to put a magnifier over your sense of, where's your passion? What lights you up? What's the fireplace of your soul? Let's play around in there. I believe that our curiosities and our passions and the things that spark us, if it lights you up while simultaneously lighting others up, that's the fireplace of your soul.
Yeah.
And let's let that, keep it blazing. So I like to awaken that and focus on that. That is so much of the key. That is so much of the key of, you know what I mean?
Oh yeah, this is like all I want to do is leave this meeting and go do this program. And honestly, I have gone through it and I've loved every minute of it, and I
Thank
can't
you.
wait to finish it. I feel like every single person needs this because
you.
I don't feel like we give ourselves enough time and space to actually do this, to process, to do the hard work, and then to be encouraged and empowered and enlightened of what is possible for my life.
Yeah.
You know, and so this book gives us the opportunity to do that. So this has been a long awaiting, and I'm very, very happy for you. Honestly,
you so
congratulations,
much.
because
Thank you.
this is incredible work. Like, I've gone through it and I'm like, whoa. This is someone who is not just talking about it and has not just researched it and talked with, yes, all the top, specialists. You've gone through this. You've
I've
done
lived
it
it,
yourself.
yeah.
You've lived this. And so that's why I think it's extra powerful, and just because you're like a total boss, powerful woman.
Thank you.
And
I don't know
I
about
love
that.
everything about it. Okay, so talk more about like the social media of like what you feel is going on right now. Obviously, we know that plays a huge role
I'd
in
love
our
to talk about
in our
this.
mental health and how we feel about ourselves and how we compare.
So, for one thing, I think the foundation of this is that research is, for years and years and years, if you go back to just like the dawn of time, human beings are biologically wired to be in community. We are biologically wired to be in relationships with each other. And that's a lot of times where there's a lot of dysfunction in addictive relationships, because that sense of need is perverted. But we are biologically wired to do what we're doing right now, to connect, to share, to help, support, and to reciprocate. We are wired that way. We shine that way.
Yeah.
And that is life-giving, and that's how we were created. That is natural. So I believe a huge part of this, and I could unpack this so much more, but social media has created this false sense of relationship. It's a shadow of the real thing. It's kind of like porn. Sorry,
Yeah.
but it's not the real thing. It's not like porn is not real intimacy, but
Yep.
it's the shadow. So you get that dopamine rush or whatever. And I'm not shaming anybody. I'm just saying this
that's
is
true.
my observations.
Yeah,
it's
say
a
it,
shadow
yeah.
of the real thing. So there's that short-term pleasure, but this long-term despair, because you can't be satiated by that.
Right.
Social media allows people to isolate while giving themselves the false sense of connection. There's also, everyone's on stage, And that's very addictive, that's very alluring, it's very seductive to have been given. I mean, there is a physical, chemical reaction as well, the dopamine rush that we get when we see that little notification. There's so much studies that have shown it's a real thing. You have a an actual reaction in your brain. And you release dopamine, which is basically like cocaine.
Yeah.
It's the same. It's like it's as addictive as cocaine. Yeah. So there's that element, but I think that it's allowed people who are maybe going through a hard time to hide while giving themselves the illusion, the short term of connection and community, but that cannot satiate them, so they end up feeling more lonely. Also, there is no immunization from being human. It doesn't matter how many followers you have, how much fame you have. I've in my work, I had a cool experience to interview some very well-known people. I've interviewed some famous people and very successful people. And I will say this, and I don't mean this in a rude way, but I've never interviewed anybody who I didn't sense some level of like, how am I doing? Or like insecurity.
Yeah,
we're humans.
totally.
I don't care how many stages or how many red carpets you've walked. I promise you, I have strolled through their minds. You know, there's no immunization from, it doesn't matter how famous you are, you still have to like, you can have, it doesn't matter how many people you've got like hanging out on your lawn, like vying for a selfie with you still have to go home inside of your mental house alone every night for the rest of your life. Yeah. And that needs to be a safe and loving, warm environment. Yeah. That is the most important thing.
Absolutely.
And I was at a dinner, I won't name names, but I did a story, I interviewed this very well-known girl, entrepreneur and influencer for a magazine cover story about 6 months ago. And she had a dinner where about 15 to 20 women that she, in the aftermath of who she'd worked with, I was probably I'm definitely the least well-known person there. I mean, I have a lot of borrowed credibility, but I don't have a large platform. And so I'm there with people who have like a couple of people with like 2 million followers on Instagram. And one by one, she had us all get up and just share our background and everything. And I am telling you, and this was fascinating, especially for my work, some of the most famous people there stood up to share the dark place they'd been through in COVID and just in the past year or two. One girl said, I have like 1.5 million followers on Instagram, and I always thought that once I got to a certain level she said this, and I quote, I always thought once I got to a certain level of followers and that it would make me happy and make me feel good, and it didn't, 0%. And another person, this unbelievably successful entrepreneur with this business, I don't want to give too much away, just like this amazing women-geared business, that hugely successful, multimillionaire, talked about the dark place that she'd been in. There is no immunization from being
that's the truth.
From being a human on this earth. This life will never not knock you down. Like, you need to go ahead and link arms with that knowing. I know that there's no telling what I may go through. I've been through some crazy things in my life, and I might again, but I know who I'm gonna be. I know that I have the power of choice, no matter what comes. And I know that as long as I'm here, I'm supposed to be, I have work to do, and I have my presence to share. And I'm going to do that. I'm going to do that. Because that's my choice. I have a few options. I can take my own life. I can live miserably, or I can live and choose joy and happiness and curiosity and wonderment and beauty and seek beauty and put myself in the way of beauty. I have that choice, and that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to share one last thing. One of the most powerful things ever. I have folded this into my body, my mind, my everything. My grandfather passed away 5 years ago. He was my dad's dad, and he was the one who he lost his wife, his little girl, and his 2 daughters-in-law in the fire. He had to go home to a big empty house alone, immersed in totems of his wife's makeup and his little girl's pictures, and he was saturated in reminders of people who were tragically taken from him, his little girl and his wife. And my surviving aunt, my dad's other sister, my Aunt Bonnie, it was the day of the burials, and she had a newborn baby, my cousin Josh, and my grandfather was ironing his shirt, and she said that she saw that he had a tear. My grandfather was a very loving but very reserved man, and he had this tear she just saw like trickle down his face. And she said, when she saw that, she said, Daddy, I can't do this. I can't go on. Like, meaning like my mom is gone, and like this is just crazy. Like reporters were calling, and all these people had died, and it was just insane. She was like, Daddy, I can't do this. She just had a breaking point. And he let her talk, and he said, Bonnie, the scripture says, whatever is kind, whatever is loving, whatever is praiseworthy, whatever is good, think on those things. And I was married to your mother for 40 years, and that's what I'm going to think about, not the awful day that took her. And I have woven that through, like, you can think about, in this world, and especially with social media, there's this so much enabling of rethinking about your traumas and rehashing them, and that is important to do. Trust me, that is the foundation of my work. But you have a choice of what to think on, and that scripture is Philippians 4:8, by the way. I'm sure you know that, but I love it. And what are you going to think on? If your mind is a garden, and you think if your life is a garden, where are you going to cast light? How are you going to feed the soil? What are you going to pull? What are you going to reach for? You have a choice at every moment of every day. And you can choose despair, and you can choose sadness, and you can choose disempowerment, but that's not going to serve your life, and that's not going to serve the world, because you're meant to be here.
That's so good. Oh my gosh. Wow. That was so much to take in. I'm just like, I don't even have words. There's nothing I mean, it's so beautiful. It's so enriching. It's so empowering, everything that you just spoke. Thank you so much for just sharing your heart and your journey and being so vulnerable and transparent, because I just don't find that a lot with a lot of people. And so you are definitely refreshing, and I knew this was going to be refreshing. So I was like, you have to do an interview with me. Before we end, is there any last thoughts that you have? Is there anything that you want to say? I want people to connect with you, and so we're going to get to that. But is there anything else you want to say? Anything that's on your heart before we end?
I kind of will just reiterate that there are lots of reasons to be sad. There are lots of reasons to want to quit. There's no shame in that, because I've been there. I've lived that life. But if that's where you are, please do not fall prey to that, because it would be such a tragedy, because there's this whole other life waiting for you on the other side of it. I spent a long time unnecessarily hanging out in the basement. And the whole time there was this big, beautiful haven waiting for me upstairs. And I had to get up and follow the light and walk back up those stairs and step into what I have now. If I had taken myself out 11 years ago, I wouldn't have my husband, who I adore. I wouldn't have my career. I wouldn't have my work that I'm in love with. I wouldn't have my precious miracle daughter. I mean, I just visited my grandmother, and I'm watching my little girl helping her cook, my little 3-year-old daughter, and I'm like, I can't imagine a better gift that I gave to my grandmother. She lost her little girl, and I have just given her little girl's grandchild. That's the greatest thing. And I wouldn't have that beautiful moment. I wouldn't have so many beautiful moments. Just know that whatever you've been through, God will never take anything away from you without giving you something of equal value in return. It is law.
Amen.
And I just encourage you to step into the power of choice that you have right now, and choose things that serve your life and that serve the world and that serve your joy. And know that the beauty and the joy and every smile on your face and every time your heart lights up with joy and inspiration, that's not an opponent to your pain. I think sometimes people are afraid to be happy if they're grieving something, because they feel like they're denying what they've been through. They can actually be companions. I have had a lot of pain in my life, but I make room for that, and I make room for beauty and joy every single day, and you can do the same thing.
Wow, that's so beautiful. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Wow, okay, everybody. So Tell us how we can connect with you on
Okay.
social media.
Yeah.
And then also, how can they get
Yes.
Radical Life Renovation?
Okay. So it is on Amazon right now, and it will be in July, which I don't know when this will air. It will be in bookstores. You can go to booksamillion.com or Barnes & Noble, but right now it is on Amazon, or you can just go to laceyjohnson.com, and that is, you can access all of my products and my book, and my Instagram is the Lacey Johnson, which is so weird for me to say. I'm not a narcissist, I promise. I feel
love it.
so
I
weird
love
when I
it.
say the Lacey Johnson, but yes, that is my Instagram.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Lacey. I love you.
I love you too.
think you are just one of the best writers.
Oh, thank you.
You're definitely one of the most enjoyable writers
Thank
when
you.
I read. And so I love you. Thank you so much for being
Thanks
here.
for having me.
Yeah, girl. All right.
Yay.
The best is yet to come.
Yes.
Thank you guys so much for being a part of today's podcast show. And we look forward to being again with you in the future. God bless you guys.
No more secret keepers now.